We're assembled today at the home of Alison and Mike Jolliffe, 39 Essex Street, and they have kindly agreed to accept this Blue Plaque in order to celebrate the life and work of Doris Page, a remarkable and exceptional lady who lived here for many years with her family until her death in 1991. And there are many people here who, no doubt, have many interests in her story. Now I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Dave Stubbs, and it's due to his enthusiasm and research and industry that we have this today's ceremony and direction of this Blue Plaque. And after he has spoken about Doris's life and work, he will be followed by Doris's son Brian Page, Reverend Becky Bevan, Vicar of St George's Church, Melanie Derbyshire, who's the current managing director of Independence Home, the charity which Doris founded, David Astor, the son of John Astor, the Newbury MP at the time, who gave great support to Doris, Mrs. Chris Phillip, chair of Newbury Rotary Club's International Committee, on their objective to eliminate polio worldwide. And after these talks, I will then ask the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gary Norman, to declare the Blue Plaque open to public gaze. I should also be giving a few thanks, in particular to the Newbury Society and to the Jolliffes. So, Dave.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, and most especially members of the Page family and representatives of the charities and organisations that Doris worked so tirelessly for during her lifetime. Welcome to you all to Newbury and to our special little bit of it, Wash Common. Can I warmly echo Anthony's thanks to all those involved who are involved in helping to keep the great things done by great people from our community alive and in the public mind. When I was first posted here as the new local beat Bobby back in the 70s, little did I know how much this area would come to mean to me and my family, and what amazing and inspirational people I would have the privilege to encounter along the way. There will be few people nowadays who are familiar with the devastating effect of the polio virus, and even fewer people who could conceive having to live imprisoned inside an iron lung which breathed for them if paralysed by this cruel disease back in the 1950s. I was therefore somewhat taken by surprise to be told that one of my duties was to be on the emergency call-out list to manually pump such a machine for one of the residents on my beat in the event of a power cut. And thus I met the amazing Doris Page here at 39 Essex Street. In our world today, where equality, diversity and human rights are woven into the fabric of life, although it might be fair to say that we still have some way to go, it would be considered almost barbaric to envisage a culture where if someone fell seriously ill, it was considered normal to keep them incarcerated for whatever life was left them. Hospital was thought the only place where appropriate care could be given, and neither they nor their loved ones were allowed any say or opinion in the matter. Unable to lift even a finger and relying on a machine for every breath, Doris had taken on a world which had decided that disabled people had no right to a family or a home life, and had campaigned tirelessly from inside her carapace, eventually influencing not only the medical view of her ability to live successfully at home, but working to change the law and access to disability benefits to support such people in their own environment, which before her groundbreaking efforts had been denied to anyone whose incapacity doomed them to life in an institution. She completed a degree in journalism and, drawing on her own experience, wrote extensively under the pen name of Anne Armstrong for many local and national papers and magazines and journals. She published 2 books and in 1968 was awarded an MBE for her campaigning for disabled people. In the 1960s there was growing interest in space travel and astronauts whose life depended on machines to breathe in space. And Doris founded a magazine for those who also needed a machine to breathe for medical reasons, coining the inspirational title, The Responaut. She had achieved much of this by the time I knew her back then, and it was always a pleasure to assist when something like a furniture lorry would park out here and her heavy bed and breathing apparatus would be wheeled out so that she could have a trip out somewhere. It was wonderful to be one of the visitors who could for a moment bring the world into her room inside, and it quickly became apparent to me what an inspiration, a force of nature and an indomitable spirit this amazing lady was. Of course, so ably assisted by her husband Ken, her family and an army of helpers and volunteers. Some of you here today may remember helping and being involved in that way. Shortly you will hear from her son Brian and others who worked with Doris to ensure that the gains she had fought for could be extended to all in a similar situation. But moving to the reason we are gathered here today, it occurred to me that inspirational projects like Newbury Town Council's Heritage Blue Plaque scheme to publicly recognise and acknowledge some of the amazing achievements of the town's illustrious past residents. Schemes like that need to cast their net wide, and that great lives are not always lived by those who may be perceived as coming from positions of power and influence. I was therefore immensely proud and pleased when my nomination for an ordinary housewife, to use the old-fashioned term, was accepted by the Town Council. A person who had not only coped with an unbelievable change in her fortune, but found the strength and spirit, despite the horrendous limitations that a much less enlightened culture in those days tried to impose on her, to literally change the world from inside this address. Doris Page MBE. It is wonderful to see so many of you here to remember and honour Doris and the legacy that her tenacity, compassion, courage and determination left to make a better place for us all. Thank you so much for coming. Bless Doris.
Well, good afternoon everybody. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who made this possible, reiterating Dave's thanks and thanking everyone who's taken time out of their busy schedules to join us today. Thank you very much. There is so much I could say. My mother spent a large part of her life living here at 39 Essex Street, and we're most grateful that her efforts to retain disabled people within the community have been recognised here. As you know, my mother was tied to a respirator on which she depended for every breath from 1955 until her death in 1991. She described the shock of changing from an active mother of 2 young children to being paralysed and completely dependent on a machine for her breathing in her books, Breath of Life and Patient's Prospect. Breath of Life was published by the BBC and serialised on Woman's Hour. And in Breath of Life, she also describes her fight to escape from hospital and regain some independence, a fight which she continued on behalf of other disabled people for the rest of her life. One memorable feature of her presence in this house for me was the constant repetitive sound of the breathing machine as it sucked air from and then pumped air into a large solid cuirass which was strapped to her chest like a giant tortoiseshell. She couldn't increase her rate or depth of breathing according to her needs as the rest of us can. Her breathing was fixed and she had to adapt her oxygen demand to that, which is the opposite of the natural state of our respiration. Being confined to her hospital bed in the dining room attached to the respirator, she rarely managed to get out into the world. But as a result, the world largely came to her, and 39 Essex Street became a hub of activity, from helpers helping with Responaut and other projects, to nurses carrying out essential functions, and VIPs calling in to offer extraordinary specialist help. The network which developed from her activity inspired and contributed to the assimilation of severely disabled people into society. Despite the rather precarious nature of her own existence here at 39 Essex Street, she quickly set about trying to free other people who had been hospitalised, initially by polio, but subsequently from many causes. She had developed a relationship with the Vicar of St George's Church, the Reverend, and Reverend helped her to produce the typed magazine Responaut, which she founded and edited. He produced every single copy of the Responaut on the church's Gestetner copier. Finally, as the circulation increased to a point where Reverend was producing not only more copies, but larger magazines with more pages, Arnold Quick, the CEO of IPC, stepped in, and IPC provided professional printing and distribution for the magazine. I've put all the copies of Responaut onto the website www.responaut.com, where you can read them and see what was happening in the community at that time, which was very different from what it is today. And it covers not only people who were Responauts, but engineers and interested parties, and the view of what was being developed. She also developed strong relationships with a number of MPs and other people in government. And as we will hear later, Newbury's MP John Astor took up the cause to launch the Invalids at Home Trust, now living on and helping people year after year as independents at home. I believe that her relationship with Newbury's MP subsequently continued with Sir Michael McNair Wilson. When she did make occasional journeys out into the world, e.g. to Buckingham Palace to receive her MBE from the Queen, to the Houses of Parliament to meet John Astor and other parliamentarians, to St George's Church, or to the Reading Evening Post, for which she wrote a regular column, it was all hands to the pumps, literally, as we loaded her into the back of a lorry in her hospital bed with 2 respirators, probably hand pumping for part of the journey. These outings were most infrequent though. She did manage to escape from the dining room into the garden from time to time, when the sun was shining in the summer. We had portable ramps which fitted over the door jambs and down into the garden. And then it was a question of taking the spare machine into the garden, moving the bed halfway out and switching the pipe from the machine indoors to the machine in the garden without my mother losing her breath. And that was a very important skill to implement. In summary, my mother spent many years living in the dining room at 39 Essex Street, which became a hub aimed at providing a community and support for other disabled people around the world. I think that the momentum developed during that time has permitted the movement to continue and grow, so that even though my mother has long since gone, her mission continues under its own steam today. I should add that as a personal note, my mother's physical situation was always accepted with a matter-of-fact normality. She was always smiling despite the enormous difficulties with which she lived. Additionally, I always knew where my mother was, which gave me a sense of security when I was a child and when I was elsewhere or travelling as an adult. Our family is enormously grateful for the recognition which is being provided today. And as mentioned above, my mother had a strong relationship with St George's Church, where my parents' ashes are interred, and I'm very pleased to hand over to the Reverend Becky Bevan the Vicar of St George's Church. Thank you very much.
It's a great privilege and pleasure to be able to speak on behalf of the St George's community. I'm a bit of a fraud because, of course, I never got to meet Doris, so I stand here speaking for the former vicars and former communities of St George's, and it's lovely actually that Piers Nash Williams, who was incumbent at 3 before me and knew Doris well, is here today. You've heard already the influence of Father Bert and how he got actively involved in the launch of the Responaut magazine, literally copying the paper for Doris and for that community. But so much involvement came from St George's that the church became known as the Responaut Church. And if you go into St George's Church today and you go into the side chapel, you will see the Responaut Book of Remembrance, where the names are recorded of those whose lives were so influenced by respiratory disease. And the inscription at the beginning of that book says this: "The names recorded in this book are those who depend on or have depended on artificial means of respiration for their very life's breath, and their families and friends." And the first page in that book, of course, remembers Doris and her family. But what has struck me as I've talked to people still in Wash Common and those who've been part of the life of the church and this community is that it wasn't just that people supported Doris, and there were many who did go and visit her and were on that list to man the pump if the electricity went down, but that she wasn't just on the receiving end, she was on the giving end. And I heard an interesting anecdote from guides who, you know, way back in the day, these guides are now in their 40s or 50s, but these guides would be on a rota to go 2 at a time to go and read to Doris here. But the anecdotes are not so much about what they did for Doris, but what Doris did for them. This is what one writes: "I enjoyed reading to her. I admired her intelligence and her patience. She was interested in a wide range of literature, including about the parish. I enjoyed the visits, and they made a lasting impression on me." The then leader of the guides remembers that when the father of one of the girls died very suddenly, it was Doris who coaxed the girl to talk about her loss and who offered the girl pastoral support. So my point is that although Doris received a lot of help from parishioners, she also gave a lot and enriched this community, which is what makes communities go round. So she's not just giving in her public life, in her active work for disability rights, but in her personal life, behind the scenes here on Wash Common. And it struck me, just to finish, that in many ways she's a latter-day St George. St George had to slay some dragons. Well, she slayed a dragon, well, no, not literally, obviously. No dragons were involved, but it's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it? He slayed some dragons. She slayed some dragons for those who would have had to face automatic hospitalisation for their condition. But I think too that she slayed the basic dragon of self-pity and bitterness that she could have easily have succumbed to. We would have done, I would have done. She slayed the dragon of self-pity and bitterness, which enabled her to reach out beyond herself. Despite her incapacity, she had that spirit which she attributed to her faith, a spirit which enabled her to reach out beyond herself, so that she's not remembered just for what she received, but very much for what she gave. Thank you.
I'm obviously not Melanie Derbyshire, who runs Independence at Home, who's over there, but we thought 2 of us was a bit of overkill. But I'm David Astor, and I am chairman of Independence at Home, and by a happy coincidence, the son of John Astor, who was MP for Newbury between 1964 and 1974. He was a shy and retiring man, and would have required someone with immense persistence and powers of persuasion to draw him out of his shell. And in Anne Armstrong, as we all knew her, whose plight had been drawn to his attention, he met such a person and force of nature. He was inspired by the courage and tenacity with which she set about overcoming the considerable challenges life threw at her. And an idea of these challenges could be found in an article that Anne wrote in 1962 entitled The Cost of Portfolio, and I quote, "Assuming 8 hours sleep to be usual, there are 56 sleeping hours and 112 waking hours each week. As we have help for about 50 hours only, that leaves 118 hours for which my husband is responsible. Before he leaves for work each day, he does the usual chores of fire lighting, shoe cleaning, washes me, cleans my hair and nose, brushes my hair, gives me a bedpan, prepares breakfast for us all, gives the children theirs, has his, and feeds me." I think that's probably some of those sort of phrases that sort of don't seem to apply today, but it does set the context of the challenges that she coped with uncomplainingly. As a direct result of meeting her and recognising the lack of state support to help people with chronic illness stay at home, Independence at Home, or as it was called then, Invalids at Home, was founded with the objective of, and again I quote, "making grants of money to beneficiaries, patients who are suffering from the effects of chronic illness, who are living at home, to help them in any way towards living normal lives." The books of Invalids or Independence at Home in 1965 note that 1 guinea was donated by Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Page in the expectation that further monies would be received for the Trust's charitable purpose. Luckily, they were right. And since the founding of the charity, grants of over £8.5 million have been made to more than 47,000 people of all ages right across the UK. To this day, we seek to help people in need to live as independently as possible, where they want, how they want, and with whom they want. It remains as vital as ever that our work, which relies heavily on generous donations, continues. I then put a sort of bit of a marketing spiel about how you can support us if you look at the website for Independence at Home, or talk to Melanie afterwards, who can give you a lot more detail about what we do. But a mention actually of Raymond Burt brought back other memories that I hadn't thought about. He was a remarkable man, and in his way contributed to Independence at Home as well. And I'd forgotten his involvement with Responaut. I hadn't forgotten that he married me, and he also christened my son, so I've known him for a long time. But it was people like that and others, Enid Hopper, but ultimately, above all, Anne, who got this charity going. But I remember part of Raymond's speech at my father's funeral, and which I'd forgotten, and he said, that he considered the founding of Independence at Home one of my father's sort of finest moments, and without Anne, that wouldn't have happened. I well remember visiting Anne on numerous occasions, and also meeting Ken, and a little bit of me thinks Ken's name should be up there as well, maybe in smaller letters, and being intrigued by the possum typewriter. A possum to me was an animal in North America, but this typewriter, I think possums still exist, but how blowing of this thing could produce all those words and thoughts. And you couldn't help but feel humbled in her presence. And enormous numbers of people, and I've referred to 47,000 of them, owe her a debt of gratitude for inspiring the charitable sector, not only Independence at Home, to bridge the gap between what was available and what was needed. It's therefore wholly appropriate and a great tribute to her that her life is being recognised and commemorated in this way, and it is a privilege to be here. Thank you very much.
My name's Chris Phillip, and I'm a member of the Newbury Rotary Club. Many of you may not know, but since about 1985, International Rotary has been had its the #1 project. It was to eradicate polio, and we have been working on that throughout the world ever since 1985, with help now from various other organisations and generous benefactors like Bill Gates, our own government, and we are almost at the stage where we can say we are this close to eradicating polio from the world. Having heard a little bit about Doris's life and the huge burdens that she had to endure because of polio, I think we all feel it shouldn't happen ever again. We haven't had polio in this country since 1962, I think was the last case. But in the world today, there are still cases of polio. And I just checked yesterday, and the latest statistic is just 1 case in Afghanistan and 1 case in Pakistan. But wherever there are children who are exposed to the virus, and it's still floating around, then polio is a risk. And we can all think of the number of displaced children at the moment in Ukraine who are not having their routine vaccinations, as our children do, against polio. So they are at risk. And whenever there is a small outbreak anywhere, then the whole of the under 5 population has to be vaccinated again. But we really hope that we can say goodbye to polio forever within the next 3 or 4 years, and we will never see people lame, limping, disabled, or having to struggle. Fortunately, iron lungs are no longer, they're almost museum cases, but it's a terrible disease and there's still no cure. So, you know, I'm very proud to be part of Rotary and all that it's done to try and eradicate polio from the world completely. But what an amazing story to remind us of the struggles that the disease has caused. And any of you who've ever travelled to places like India, where there are so many children who have been paralysed with polio and see them begging on the streets, it really hurts to think that today, you know, it's still a problem. But we are very much involved, and we've raised something like $160 billion over a period of about 40 years for this campaign, and we will see it finished. But thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much indeed for all those remarks and that inspiring story. And I have to say that of all the, I think it's the 15th Blue Plaque that Newbury Town Council has erected in the present generation, this is by far the largest attendance. And including, I have to say, I would very much like to say, we welcome our MP, Laura Faris, who has honoured us by her attendance. I would like in particular to thank the Newbury Society for its generous donation of £100 towards this plaque, as they have done with other blue plaques. And I would like to repeat a thanks of the Town Council to Mr and Mrs Jolliffe for allowing this plaque to be attached to their residence. I now invite the Deputy Mayor of Newbury, Councillor Gary Norman, to spread a little bit of mayoral magic onto us.
I'm Gary, I'm the Deputy Mayor of Newbury. I'm just going to start by an apology really, which the Mayor should be here, but he was unable to come today, so I'm afraid you've got me, and I've done my best to reflect the red mayoral robe by wearing this jacket. Also, I become Mayor in 10 days' time, so I regard this as my first proper mayoral duty. Okay, now the Heritage Working Group, under the auspices of Newbury Town Council, we put up and arrange plaques for places, events, institutions, and above all, people. And my favourite subgroup of the people we commemorate, as Dave Stubbs said, are ordinary people who do a great public good by leading an extraordinary life. And Doris Page is absolutely at the top of that list, as reflected by all the people that are here today. So, as Reverend Becky said, the only regret I have is that I never actually met Doris personally, but a nice second best thing for me is that I get to meet a lot of the family today and people who knew her. So I look forward to talking to you all later on. So anyway, without further ado, it is my great privilege, honour and pleasure to declare Doris's plaque open for public gaze. Thank you very much.